Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. Wait, before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning into this episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast, and just ask you to please hit the like button below or click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or follow this podcast if you are listening. That really helps the show out. But also, if you want to help us further, then join our Patreon. We have an awesome community that is growing there. Or if you want to make a one-time donation, we are a nonprofit foundation, so head to our website. Both the Patreon and the website will be linked down below. But without further ado, back to the episode. I am Bradon Coy, and I'm your host, and I'm super excited to be here with Dr. Brett Seymour. I've been looking forward to this episode for quite a while. We've had this planned for a little bit, and I'm super stoked to jump into this. Dr. Seymour is a professor at the University of Texas, El Paso, and he studies artificial light in insects. Sorry, I'm blanking on words right now. He studies artificial light and insects, sensory biology, and insect decline, and I'm super excited to jump into all of those things and how he's gone into all of that. So welcome to the show, Dr. Seymour. Go ahead and introduce yourself for us.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bradon. It's a pleasure to be here. I, too, have been looking forward to this. It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about this. All right. So as you said, I'm a professor. I'm an assistant professor. I've been at the University of Texas at El Paso for 2.5 years now. Before that, I was a postdoc fellow at Washington University in St. Louis with the Living Earth Collaborative. And before that, I was a postdoctoral fellow with the National Park Service, specifically the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division out of Colorado State University. And yeah, my research is really focused on understanding the effects of artificial light on naturally evolved behavior and vision in organisms, mostly insects, with the idea that, most of these animals have evolved under, not most, all animals have evolved under consistent, predictable light cycles for millennia, right? And now we do what we do best, meaning us humans, and we have just bombarded them with all this novel light. And it really is a pollution, it's a toxin, and that's what my lab studies.
Yeah, wow. Lots to go in there, but let's just jump right into it. I'm super interested in this because from my understanding, there's not a whole lot of research on the effects of artificial light on insects. So I'm super interested, just kind of give us an overview, like why is this becoming such an issue and what kind of got you interested in studying this?
Yeah. All right. So that's several questions there. So we'll start in maybe the reverse order. So my PhD, and this should be fun if you remember all of your podcasts, and this will be interesting for your listeners too if they connect the dots. So my PhD was focused on how light environments, natural light environments in the tropics, specifically in Panama, Ecuador, Peru, how these different light environments drove coloration and vision in butterflies, specifically heliconius butterflies. So these are the long-winged butterflies. And so now here's my question to you, Brady, because I have listened to several of your podcasts. Yeah. Do you remember who down in Panama studies coloration of heliconius butterflies?
Yeah. Dr. McMillan, Dr. Owen McMillan.
Exactly, Dr. Owen McMillan. That's right.
That's awesome.
And the reason I bring this up for your listeners, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, Braden, but this was the first person that you interviewed for your show was Dr. Owen McMillan. I believe he was your first speaker.
Yeah,
ever.
I think you're right, and oh man, that's crazy. Yeah, so I met him in Panama when I went,
right,
years ago, and he was one of the entomologists that I met there, and so he gave me like a tour of his research
the insectary
in Gamboa. Yeah,
exactly.
And
that's where I did my PhD,
houses.
Right there, where you went.
Amazing.
That's where I did my PhD, was at that insectary.
No
and
way.
I had rigged up these different tents with different lights, mostly just filtering out natural light and seeing how butterflies interact under forest shade, open canopy. But yeah, so Owen
Yeah.
is is my guy. Yeah, he was my guy down in Panama and one of
That's
my
crazy.
advisors. And yeah, so anyway, I thought it'd be fun to bring that back up because I do know that yeah, he was influential for you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, so there's that connection. And
Mm-hmm.
my PhD was focused on tropical butterflies, very day active, right? Diurnal. I wasn't thinking about night at all. But, as you go down to the tropics, and, being a graduate student, I would have long breaks. I would maybe be 6 months or a year, and I would go back down. And things are changing so quickly, especially the rainforest, right? And we would go to certain areas, and it would now be, it had just been slash and burned, and now there were cattle there. Or we'd hear really good spots to go and sample, and it would just be farmland, right? And some of 10 years ago was amazing rainforest. So that starts to wear on you, right? And as a hardcore basic biologist at the time, and what I mean by basic, I don't mean, millennial or Generation Z basic. I just mean that I was really focused on understanding the biology of a butterfly for knowledge's sake, right? Not applied. And so it's just, what do we know? What do we not know? Let's go find out, right? And yet, you go to these places and you start to have this conservation chip on your shoulder saying that we probably should start protecting this even more, right? People are doing it, but I should probably jump in the game. And at that time, there was this opportunity to the National Park Service for a postdoc fellow to come up with some projects and study the effects of artificial light at night on animals. And I thought, well, I study light, right? Now I'm one of the experts on light and biology. Let's see if I can go do this. And I actually had another opportunity to go do an NSF funded postdoc on more of the heliconia's coloration stuff. I was really fortunate to get both of them. And I was like, maybe it's time to go work for the National Park Service and start doing some conservation tilt and try to protect things and make things better than just understanding for knowledge's sake. I do both now, right? Which is great. But that's how I got started in this, was through butterflies, understanding how light environments drive butterfly behavior. And these are really subtle differences, right? We're talking whether they're out in the open or in the rainforest, there's huge effects. So you've got to imagine if you're a nocturnal species and you just bombard them with light, there's going to be an immense effect and cascade. Oh, yeah. So that's where I went, and that was 2016. I started doing that, and now I do both. I do natural light cycles and artificial light cycles. Obviously, they're two sides of the same coin, and it's been a hell of a ride. So we now have the professorship. We've got 3 PhD students here, a postdoc kind of working on actual rattlesnakes and light pollution. So we're all over the place. Again, my main interest would be in insects. And obviously during 2019, 2020, we had the insect declines, right? The insect apocalypse really started to make headlines. So I started to get involved in that too, and really trying to understand what the role of light pollution is with those insect declines. Obviously, it's really important to tease out any specific causation of insect declines, but we're trying to see what the effects of light pollution are on that. And so I'm a part of a team that's involved in the status of insect declines, focused on light pollution. Okay, so that's how I got here, where I am. I should also say I'm totally a poser entomologist, right? When I go to the Entomology Society, right, everyone's got like tattoos of their organisms. I don't have any tattoos of insects. I'm not, just like Owen said on his show, like I'm kind of hard pressed to be a true entomologist. I've only actually had one course of entomology, and that was in my graduate career. I teach entomology. I am the curator of entomology at UTEP, but I'm really a behavioral ecologist, right? And I am an animal behaviorist, a conservation behaviorist. And so I mostly know that, and I use insects because I think they're the best study organisms. And I think, honestly, they're the most important group of organisms on this planet with a tie, right? They tie angiosperms. And that's, but you can't have one without the other, right?
Right.
And so that group alone, I mean, those are the most important things that if we want to continue to have our standards of living, we must be protecting the insects and the angiosperms. So that's where I am now. And again, I'm a total poser. People, bring me photos of insects. I have no idea. And I know what order they are. Right. But I don't know. have no idea. And yeah, it's a challenging thing to put on this curator hat because there's, millions of insects
Oh,
and
yeah.
they all have different life stages. So not
Hmm.
only, so this is what's so frustrating, Brandon, being here at University of Texas, El Paso. We have, I think we have about 8 curators, 6 of whom are vertebrate curators. So they have like
Mm.
we literally have one curator who's just ducks, right? One duck guy.
Really?
That's all he does,
Yeah.
just ducks. And so he's got to know, like, I don't know, 200 species or something. And, baby duck mostly looks like an adult duck. It's not that
Yeah.
hard, right? Maybe you have to
Yeah.
know some eggs. And then I
Hmm.
am the curator of all insects. So I'm supposed to somehow know 1.3 million species of insects plus
Yeah.
their egg stage, all the different instars, the pupa and the
Hmm.
adult, right? It's
Hmm.
very stressful, and so I don't really do that well. But anyway, I'm just letting people know, like, I'm not one of those entomologists that you find in a collection IDing stuff. I'm not doing that. Mostly, I actually go out and, ironically, destroy the environment with light pollution and see what
Hmm.
happens to the animals. Right? Do a lot of field-based stuff. Just actually came back from Chile and Panama where I was doing some of this, and then I also do some stuff in the lab where we look at light-to-light behavior and eyes and other stuff like that. But anyway, that's the story of how I got to be where I am. And I think the reason I'm on this show is because you guys had a super awesome vendor booth at the Entomology Society meeting in
I think it
Maryland
was last
in
year. Yeah. Not
2023,
not
right?
Phoenix, but the one before that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. In
Hmm.
Maryland. Yeah. And I came by and put my name on a paper and now here I am.
Here we
Yeah,
are.
that's
Sweet.
right.
Yeah, so I'm super intrigued because I took a entomology course like the intro entomology course last semester. And we were learning about sensory biology and like the effects, um, not so much the effects of artificial light on insects, but that light pollution is becoming a bigger and bigger issue very, very quickly. So I'm kind
Mhm.
of intrigued, like, what are you seeing? I want you to kind of illustrate for us what the gravity is for, like, how serious this is for insects specifically.
Yeah. So, science is a repetitive process. Your knowledge changes every day that you think about it, right? So, had you asked me this question a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I would have been very, very adamant that light pollution is an immense problem, a huge problem, perhaps more so even than like pesticides and climate change, right? Because you put out
Mm,
these lights, insects come to them right then. There's an estimate that's about 30% chance of them surviving to the next day, right? Which is insane, right? So this is a really
yeah.
good way to kill an insane amount of insects. And of
Hmm.
course, that's kind of the point, right? I mean, agricultural entities use lights at night to kill insects. That's what they
Hmm.
use, right? So
Hmm.
they use pesticides and they also use lights at night, right, to get the insects away so they don't lay eggs on the crop.
Right.
And so it's no surprise, and yet you tell people and they're like, "Oh, really? Light pollution matters?" Well, yeah, we've been using it right for a very long time. So I would have gone on this crazy soapbox going on about how light pollution is super, super important, and everyone needs to get their heads out of their ass because this is so important.
Hmm.
But now, perhaps it was my own head that needed to be removed because I have a colleague, Avalon Owens. I don't know if you met her, but so she's a postdoc fellow, or I guess she's technically just a fellow at Harvard. And she just had this recent study, which is really, really interesting, where she looked at a species of moth. I think it was the corn borer. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think it was corn borer moth, right?
Yep.
And what she looked at were historical data from 1990 until now in these agricultural study sites where they had both pheromone traps for males as well as light traps. And they monitored how many males would come to the light trap and to the pheromone traps. And
Mm.
when you plot that over the 30 years that she did, you find that the amount of moths, male moths, coming to these lights at night drastically decreases, right? So if you're only
Mm-hmm.
looking at that data set, you're going to say, oh, all these insects are in decline, right? This is a
Mm-hmm.
serious problem. But
Yeah.
then you look at the pheromone traps, right? And It has not changed. That's flat.
Hmm.
And so what this is really showing is likely that insects are losing the attraction to light. And so perhaps, and we know this in a couple other studies too, that insects have evolved to not go to light anymore. So maybe light pollution is not as bad as it seems because these animals are responding, are evolving, and hopefully having a fighting chance, no longer coming to lights at night. What does that mean for, the fact that why did they come to light in the first place? What's likely for navigation, right? So are they not able to navigate as well now that they've lost this? We have no idea, right? This is a great question for follow-up research. We don't know. But perhaps light pollution is not as bad as we thought because perhaps these populations that have been exposed to light pollution for decades have actually evolved and adapted to no longer come, right? Now, of course, there's bottleneck effects. There's all this other issues, like what traits are we also selecting for when we've done this? It's not simply like, oh, they're going to take care of themselves. It's fine. No worries about light pollution. No, light pollution is still a problem. It just might not be as bad as we thought.
Right.
Yeah, does that answer your question? That's my current knowledge on the matter.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because, prior to right now, I was under the impression that it was, a big issue, and it could still be, right? But
it is. It's a big issue. It just might not be as big as we thought. It's a huge issue, though. Because the issue, too, Bradon, is that this is I can only tell you this of areas where they've been exposed to light for a long time. You put light up in a pristine environment, which we're doing, right? The area of light pollution is growing around 2% per year, right? So there's new areas, protected areas, that are getting light pollution all the time. Those insects are not adapted. Those areas specifically are conservation entities, right? To make sure that we protect our biodiversity, including our insects, or putting new lights up. So where we think we're actually protecting that biodiversity those are the populations that are not ready for light pollution. So it is still a huge issue. It's just, it's more complicated than we thought, and that the animals are responding.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious if it's that case just because they're insects and they are very adaptable and reproduce very quickly. So, like, I wonder if, you mentioned one of the students is studying rattlesnake or snakes, right?
Right.
That could be interesting to see how, like, a quickly reproducing, insect that are very adaptable would adapt compared to something that's less so. But it's also another level to it is that insects are highly light, aware, whereas there are other animals that are just not. So I'd be curious to see that.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Me too, Braden. Yes. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Insects, they have really fast generation times, right? Fast speciation rates. And so it makes sense that they would be the ones that are adapting the quickest. And then, of course, there's also these bottom-up effects that light pollution also affects the plants that these insects depend upon, right? Both for pollination as well as for actual food. So there's more to the story, too, that even if insects themselves weren't affected by light pollution, which they drastically are, the plants themselves, in fact, and it's very complicated depending on which family of plants you're talking about, and which habitat, time of year, because we can talk about photoperiod and how it all changes. So you have one prediction in the spring and one prediction in the fall. Well, what's really interesting is that these plants, some will have more chemical toxins under light pollution, some will have less, some will be more stressed, some will be less stressed, some will grow more, some will grow less. And so it just depends on which species of insect you're interested in and how their host plant or their floral resource is going to be handling this light pollution. And unlike insects, which can actually they can fly away, right? They're better at dispersing in minutes. Plants, they can't really get away. So if you've got this new light that's coming in an area, those plants that are being subjected to that light are likely going to have direct physiological responses that could affect their interactions with their insects. And so it's another what do I want to say? Another gear in that crazy arms race between plants and insects. And you don't know who it's going to tip. right? Who's going to be in favor?
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now there's evidence that's showing sometimes it's beneficial for the plant, sometimes it's beneficial for the insect, sometimes it hurts both, sometimes it benefits both. And this is not just for nocturnal species of insects either. We actually have a study looking at the yucca moth, right? Classic yucca moth, right? Where you have one species of yucca, you have one species of yucca moth. They depend on each other. It's really weird because in most cases, when you have an insect that the larvae feed on the plant, usually they have a different nectar resource, or whatever, right? But these yucca moths, they lay their eggs on the specific species of yucca, and the yucca needs the pollinator to be the yucca moth. So it's a very love-hate relationship, right? It's way more complicated than your usual bifurcation of pollination and then host plants. And what we found is that this diurnal moth, yucca moths are actually diurnal, meaning they fly during the night or fly during the day, right?
Right.
Under light pollution, you actually have greater pollination success with the yucca moth. So what we're thinking is that these yucca moths, they actually do fly to lights at night, even though they're diurnal, right? They only are supposed to be pollinating during the day. That's when they're active. Okay. But these lights draw them in, then they hang out there, and then they're more likely to pollinate the plants that they're nearby, right? So you pulled all of these away. So if you're farther away from a light source, you don't have that yucca moth. So then there's more yucca moths at a specific yucca plant, increases pollination, but yuccas will actually abort their flowers if they have too many caterpillars, right? Because if they have too many caterpillars, they'll eat the whole plant and the yucca won't do well. So they actually will abort certain flowers, making it so that not enough caterpillars can destroy them. So you have this weird effect of light pollution at night on a diurnal pollinator, where the plant can actually have increased pollination, but decreased survival because there's more insects eating, right? So this just shows you how insanely complicated the story is.
And that's just one system.
That's just one system. That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has, the story has many levels to it, because maybe we're right and it's not as detrimental to insects as we thought it once was, but if it is to plants, right, angiosperms, it's like that's just as bad, if not worse, right? Because then the insects will, not be able to survive, and then we won't have plants, or that's a big problem. So
that's I mean, big problem, Brayden. That's like understatement.
Right. Yeah, it's not like
it is a huge, you choose whatever swear word you want problem.
Right.
It is an insane problem. That I hope we figure out.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we figure it out. Not to be an alarmist, but I really hope we figure it out.
Yeah. So what's the research you and your students are doing right now for? What are you working with right now specifically?
Yeah. So right now, we've got several different directions we're going, and one of them that I'm really, really, really excited about. This is more my research with Avalon Owens, the fellow at Harvard. She's now probably become my closest collaborator. We do a lot of stuff together. We have two main interests that we're running. One is looking at the global attraction of insects to light at night, right? So we can come up with all these hypotheses of, look, if you're in this habitat, you should have more insects attracted at night. If you're in this habitat, maybe less. It depends on the season, right? We can come up with all these hypotheses based on all these different environmental factors. We have no data to test this. So what we're doing is we're coming up with this big global study where we're going to send light kits to about 100 different labs across the world. And they're going to go out and they're going to, for like 2 to 3 nights, they're going to turn on these lights with these bucket traps. And they're going to about every 15 minutes, they're going to stop the sample and start another sample. So we can actually look at the rate at which insects are coming to that light, right? And we'll have this across all the different biomes, across all the 6 different continents, right? We're not going to do Antarctica for obvious reasons. And we're going to have this awesome data set to actually start to look, okay, what is the actual rate at which insects are going, right? And we can't really do too much about the absolute number because obviously your biggest number is going to be in the tropics. Your smallest number is going to be up in the tundra, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessarily as important, though. It's more of at what time is light pollution having the biggest effect on communities, right? Based on where they are, latitude-wise, habitat-wise, continent-wise. Also, just how close are they to urban environments? So we're trying to generate this huge data set where we can actually start to pull this apart. That's what I mentioned. I think I mentioned I was just down in Chile and Panama, and I was there doing this. We're doing preliminary data, and what I was really testing was kind of a sub question, which is, are insects attracted to light at the same rate throughout the night, right? So if you turn on a light, let's say you turn a light on at sunset, right? Are insects all of a sudden just all going to come and then nothing's going to come because you've already pulled everything there, right? Or is it just going to be a steady rate of insects coming? Or perhaps these insects, they have different times in which they're active. And so maybe nothing really comes until a couple hours into the night when things become much more active. Or perhaps maybe they're not that active at night because it's still very hot from the day. And only in the morning do they come to the light, right? We don't know. I can come up with 100 different hypotheses based on 100 different contexts, right?
Yeah.
But what's a scientist to do with a bunch of hypotheses, right? You got to test them. So that's what we're testing. And so we went to Panama, which is about 8 degrees north of the equator. So that's tropical, right? Pretty much 0 degrees. Always consistent photo periods. What I mean by photo periods is the duration of day to night, right? You get about a 12 to 12 duration around the tropics. Then you go down to 30 degrees. So we went to the Atacama Desert, which is a super cool biome, right? This is in Chile, very southern Peru, one of the driest places in the world. And mostly their precipitation only comes through fog. So it's on the coast.
Oh, wow.
This cool fog comes in. It's very, very cool. There's all these adaptations for the plants to just pull water from the fog, and then the insects like lick these plants that have a lot of hairs, like cacti basically picture. They're really hairy little tendrils coming out. So we went down there, and that's 30 degrees. And the reason we went there is because we also have a data set from El Paso, Texas. Well, it's about 2 hours, a very, very pristine habitat where we have a research station. And we did that in November. So we're doing this comparison with 2 desert sites, right? One in the northern hemisphere, one in the southern hemisphere. And then we also went down to 42 degrees south, which is on this big island, basically at the northern tip of Patagonia, right? And we also have a data set that Avalon did in May. So we've got these comparisons now. Yeah. What I suspected, and I don't want to go on too much detail about this, but what I suspected was that there would be differences in that rate of the insects coming based on whether you're in the tropics, the desert, or temperate forest, right, where it's much colder. And what we're finding is that in the tropics and in the temperate forest, your biggest time of which insects are coming to the light is after sunset for a couple of hours. Whereas in the desert, your biggest time is in the morning, about 2 hours before sunrise.
Okay.
And I've got some ideas of why that's happening. Don't want to say too much yet, not because I'm afraid someone's going to steal it, but just because I'm not sure, right? So we're running more experiments. I think there's a temperature effect. And so in the desert, right, it's still very hot at night. So if you're an insect, you should get away. And when is the coldest time of the day anywhere? Well, it's right before sunrise. So if you're an insect, right, and you're in the hot desert, it makes sense to actually shift your behavior to early morning when it's the coolest, right? So you don't desiccate. But if you're in temperate forest, the hottest time of the day is right at sunset. Well, a couple hours before sunset, right? But it's hot then. And so if you're that evening, right before sunrise, it could get down to 2-3 degrees Celsius. And that's actually what we found, right? So when we went out in Chile at 42 degrees south, it was 2 degrees Celsius when we were collecting at sunrise. It was very cold, right? Yeah. And so we saw a couple moths flying around because they're crazy, right? They can handle cold, but nothing else is flying because it's too cold. But at night, it's still warm. It's still, 20 degrees Celsius or about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So things are still flying. So what we're finding is that depending on where you are, insects are more susceptible to light pollution at different times. And then, of course, we want to know how this changes across the season. So that's one of our big
Yeah.
project. Hopefully, you'll be reading about that in a really, really good journal in a couple of years. We'll see, or the whole thing could flop. I don't know, but that's what I'm really excited about. That's what gets me up in the morning. I'm just so excited about. And then another project that we have is looking at more. So that's more basic research, right?
Yeah. Getting a baseline.
Yeah, right. Baseline data, getting all this theory that we can test, having a bunch of hypotheses, and it's gonna be so fun. And then people can use this data set for years to come, right?
Oh,
Hopefully
yeah.
we can keep doing it like every couple of years, see how things are changing. It's very exciting. I hope the NSF is listening and they'll fund this. That we're gonna submit this grant proposal.
And then I'm interested to see like change in season too for that.
Yes, me too.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like different times of the year.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. Yeah, because what would you expect, right? There's going to be no effect of seasonality in the tropics, and yet those species that are up high in the north or high in the south or low in the south, I'm going to think about it. They should have more phenotypic plasticity, right? Because they're used to having very short nights and very long nights, and so they're going to have these effects like diapause, right? And it's going to get weird. At least that's what we think.
Yeah.
But we don't know because we don't have the data.
It's exciting.
Right?
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yes, it's very exciting. I'm glad to hear that you're excited about it.
Yeah.
If you weren't, I'd be in big trouble, right? Because you're a total functionary. And if you didn't get behind it, I'm uh-oh.
I don't know who will. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's one that's really exciting. And then the other big project that I'm pushing forward, hopefully with the National Park Service, is, and we got a little funding from them, but hopefully get a bigger grant from them, is to look at the main things that we think will really stop insect attraction to light at night and overall just effects of light pollution on the environment. And that is how you shield your light. That's the color of light that you use and the intensity of the light, right? So shielding, right? Making sure the light is just going down to where you need it. The spectrum in general, having it more shifted to the orange or red wavelengths is way more beneficial to the environment than blue light, because most circadian rhythms are directed by blue light, and also the flight to light orientation behavior by insects is mostly UV or blue light dominant. So it's specific wavelengths, right? So if we can just knock those out and just focus on the longer wavelengths, we should reduce the impact. And then also putting it on timers, so how much time the light's on for, that's going to tie into this big, large global data set, right? Where we know, like, okay, this is when they're really active. So if we can reduce the intensity of light or just turn off those lights during those hour or 2 hours when those insects are really attracted, we should greatly reduce the consequences. So we've got all the theory coming from this big global project. Then we're going to have these case studies out here in the desert, and maybe in Maine, with a bunch of different replicates of different shielding, different colors, different timers, different intensities, and seeing what happens with that local community. And I should also say that the area where we're doing the second one is in a pristine, light, naive environment. So these are not insects that have already been evolving, right, to light. These are insects that have never seen a bulb before in their life, and they're gonna get very confused. So those are my two main projects. I have a graduate student, John Dyche, who was awarded one of the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program fellowships, which is awesome. He's looking at how artificial light and the moon interact for insect behavior, right? Specifically like flying and then mark and recapture. So he's really interested in whether, if you're in an area with high sky glow, so this is the light pollution that comes from light being scattered by the atmosphere. And everyone's pictured this, right? When you're driving towards a city at night, you see that big sky glow dome, right? That big yellow, orange dome over a city before you even start to see any buildings or anything, right? You just see this big cloud of light. And so that's sky glow. That can travel hundreds of kilometers away from the source. So this is hitting all of our conservation areas. Even though those conservation areas are very far from cities, that light pollution is still reaching them. So John's really interested in knowing, if you've got big sky glow on the horizon, does that affect the ability of your moth to navigate based on the moon? So that's what he's really interested in. I have another student, Ali, who also received the Graduate Research Fellowship. He's looking at how, what do I want to say? plant pollinator interactions are being affected by Alan. So he's looking at a nocturnal species of plant that only flowers at night, right? It's a white plant. It's called the Sacred Datura. Super cool plant.
Yeah.
For anyone that's into psychedelics or indigenous people's history in the Southwest, they might know about the Sacred Datura because it's one of these crazy like psychedelic plants. Do not do anything with it. It's very dangerous. But indigenous people used to go out and crazy things have happened, right? But yeah, so he's looking at this plant and which insects are coming at what time to pollinate and how light pollution might be altering that community that's coming and pollinating, which is very exciting. I'm very excited for this project as well. And then lastly, I have another student, Miles Horn, he's really looking at just the circadian rhythms driving visual abilities under different light intensities. So this would also be under artificial light at night or just a change from sunrise to noon, back to sunset to, complete darkness under different lunar conditions, all that. How does the circadian rhythm alter the ability of spiders to perceive their environment, right, with light intensity? And that's what he's looking at. And he's actually looking at inner individual differences and some personality stuff. So we got a lot of stuff going on. It's all very exciting. Hopefully some of it works out. But those are the main projects.
Wow. Like lots of really cool stuff. And then you also teach as well, right? Are you teaching any courses this semester?
Yeah. Teach committees. So I teach animal behavior in the spring and I teach entomology in the fall. Yes. And then I'll teach a graduate level course next year. And I'll probably teach that on species interaction. So one of my interests is also predator-prey interactions, right? And so I do a lot with how light pollution is altering the predator-prey, arms race, which and that's kind of where we're taking the pollinator stuff too, is all this arms race. I love conflict. Conflict is very fun. It's very fun to investigate and how these animals and plants are interacting. So I'll probably teach a grad course on species interactions.
Wow. Yeah. Big stuff going on. But I was kind of curious, like just from you talking, and this might be helpful for some people at home, but I was kind of curious, like what do we think the original purpose of certain insects being attracted to light would be? Like, would it just be navigation at night, or why? Like, what do you think the purpose of this was?
Yeah, so I don't know. I have ideas. And there was an excellent paper that was just published by Sam Fabens and Yash Sandhi. They're both shared co-first authors on this paper that was published in, I want to say it's Nature Communications. And what they found, this doesn't really answer your question, but I promise I will answer your question as best I can. But what they found was that, so they looked at all these moths coming to lights, and they used high-speed videography, right? And what they found is that as the moth comes to the light, they're always keeping their dorsum oriented to the light. So what they found was the mechanism at which insects are coming to light, and that is what they've now called the dorsal light response. So insects, as they're flying, they're always keeping their dorsum oriented to the light. And so they keep going around in circles, and eventually they'll just get so close to the land, right? And their dorsum is still up. But what you'll find sometimes when the light bulb is actually a little bit higher up, you might find these big like hawk moths, the sphingid moths, right? They're actually flipped belly up, right? And so weird things are happening where they're trying to orient their dorsum. It's weird. Anyway, this is the mechanism of which these insects are coming. Their paper, they claim that this is, an evolutionary response for navigation because you have the moon or the sky, which would be the brightest part of the sky. And so you at least can always know what's up. So you're doing that. They didn't actually test for that, because to test for that, they need to actually have the insect flying above and have it invert. They didn't really do that, but it's definitely the next step. So likely what's happening, right, is that these nocturnal insects are navigating with the brightest object above them, which should be the moon in the sky or the stars in the sky. And that makes sense when you bring in a light source that's on the horizon now. Okay, now you're going to orient this way. You're just going to keep going in circles
Mm.
because the brightest part of the sky used to be a point source, right? That moon doesn't move. You can never fly all the way to the moon, right?
Right. Yeah.
Even if you fly 100 miles, that moon is not going to change that much in space. But if you're only 100 feet or 100 meters from a light bulb, well, now as you're moving, right, that distance changes. So now you're going to start orienting yourself.
Yeah.
And that's when you start getting the circle behavior, right? So likely it's for navigation. But what also doesn't make sense is why you have diurnal insects that are attracted to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense other than like maybe they think it's daytime now. We don't know. We still don't know. Navigation makes the most sense. It's the best evidence that we have. It's something that has frustrated or at least led to curious minds thinking about this behavior, like literally for what would it be now? 2,300 years. So Pliny the Elder, right? He's the one that first quoted, it was Latin or Greek or something, about a moth to a flame, right? And he was thinking about like why this would happen. And he too thinks that it was based on navigation. But we still don't really know what the adapted value is. Likely it's navigation, but no study has tested that yet.
Yeah.
And I still haven't figured out how exactly we would test that. So if there's any young minds out there that knows, you should come to my lab, or you should go to another lab and you should do it. And I can't wait to read how you tested it. But yeah, the adapted value of flying, of having that response to a light bulb. Why? Why is it adapted? And probably the moon. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. And like you said, it would, it makes sense in our heads, right? Like, they use it for navigate. Like it makes sense given just thinking about how it all works. But we haven't, like you said, we haven't actually tested it. So how do you know for sure until you've tested it?
Yeah.
So.
And then also, like, a lot of the things that come to these lights at night aren't, like, they don't really disperse anywhere. So it's like, why do they need to navigate? Right? I mean, a lot of times it's like midges and mosquitoes. A lot of things that they spend, I don't know, their entire adult life within probably like 5 meters. Why the hell do they need to navigate by the moonlight? It doesn't make any sense. Right? And why would that be an ancestral trait to all of insects? It just, there's still a lot of questions there, and I'm very skeptical.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'm really getting from all of this is that there's a lot of research that needs to be done still on all of it.
Yes, job security, Bradon.
Yeah, for
sure. Come join us, man. Come join us.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, how many people are doing this with insects? Do you know?
Yes, I do know. I mean, I'm sure I've missed a couple, right?
Yeah.
There's always that new graduate student that I don't know yet that's in a different lab that's not actually studying light pollution, but they're interested in it. They're going to start doing it. So really quick, I guess I'll give a shout out to this research coordinated network. I don't know if you've heard of it, the Status of Insects. Have you heard of this?
I don't think so.
It's a National Science Foundation funded network. And so what that is, they basically give like $500,000 for all these scientists to get together and think, right? It doesn't actually give any money for research. The idea is that they'll write more proposals to fund the research. The Status of Insects Decline is, I don't know if you've had him on your show, but is Dave Wagner is one of the lead guys on the insect declines. Right? So
doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, you should totally talk to him. You should totally have him on your show. He's all about insect declines. He's awesome. Brilliant guy. One of the leaders in entomology, right? He's at University of Connecticut.
Okay.
And so he's running this big network. And within that, we have our light pollution subgroup. Of the people who are interested in insects and light pollution, we have about 50 to 60 people globally, right? So there's about 50 to 60 people who are researching this as their main interest. Again, there's other people who are just, they're hardcore ant people, whatever, that put a bulb up and they look at ant behavior, right? But they're not really studying light pollution. They're really studying ant behavior.
Right.
But those who are dedicated to studying light pollution and insects, there's probably about 60 of them. You have to realize that more than half of those are probably students of other people in that crew, right?
Right.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so of the labs in the U.S. that I know of that are studying light pollution in insects, there's less than a handful,
Mm.
right? So we have Jesse Barber's group, but he's now moved to the American Museum of Natural History. He was at Boise State. He was doing quite a bit. We have Clint Francis, who's in California. We have myself. Uh, who else? We have Aikido in Florida. He's got a couple students who are interested in it. Shannon Murphy in Denver is doing some really cool stuff with LEPs and light pollution. Yash Sandi's getting a little bit into it. He's now going to be at Case Western in Ohio.
Mm.
There's some aquatic people who are doing some light pollution with aquatic insects.
Mm.
But really, the main area to be in this field is Europe. There's a lot more people in Europe than there are in the U.S. Yeah, Europe cares way more about light pollution. Like they're way ahead of us.
That's
way ahead of us. It's fantastic because I get to go to Europe all the time. It's really great.
Yeah.
But that's where they're all at. So we're having a conference that Avalon and I are putting together through this coordinated network in May. We're having it in Exeter just because that's where most people are, is over in Europe. Couple of people in Australia doing really good work. A couple people in New Zealand. Very few people in Asia. One person in South Africa that I know of. So we're not spread equally across, which is always the case, right? In science, we have serious issues with that. And so that's also the case with light pollution insects. Very few people in South America currently doing it. But I just went down there, right? And so we're starting to have some collaborators who are at universities in Chile and in Panama who are very interested in getting this going. But it's a steep learning curve, right? So light's very difficult to study. It's not something that is as simple as just turning on a light bulb. I mean, you can do that, but there's a lot of assumptions. So I think a lot of people, to do it right, have not really jumped in, which is why I think this global project is really good, because we do have the expertise and we can share it more with other areas, especially places like South America and Africa, where they have the most growth in light pollution, right?
Oh, wow.
This is, and the reason is because they had lighting poverty, or they have lighting poverty. So this is more the socioeconomic side, right? Where they didn't have the resources to have light, and now they do, right? And more areas had the resources to have light. So now they're putting, because light's a lot cheaper due to LEDs. So now there's more and more light pollution coming in those areas, which is, it's great that those areas are being lit, right?
Yeah.
But they need to be lit in a way that those people can still have those natural resources that they depend on, especially like in Africa, right? Where they're really dependent upon the environment for a lot of the livelihood. So that's a whole other thing that we're going to have to work on too in the future. The first thing is just getting people interested in Africa on this, right? And helping them develop their own research lines and giving them the expertise so that they can move forward with it. So we're also trying to do that, but not be like colonialists, right? Like it's a very it's a fine line of helping and then being just doing too much, right? So it's another thing where we're trying to address.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, and I kind of have a interesting thought experiment for you. Let's just say some evidence came out that artificial light at night was super bad. Well, like it was going to end the world.
It is.
Right?
So that comes out all the time, right? Oh, it's to end the world. Okay.
Yeah. So like, basically, it's serious enough that a policy needs to be made. Like, do you think that's like kind of the only way is through a policy? And then there's the question of like worldwide, because like obviously all these countries have very different political systems and all that kind of stuff. So do you think like policy making is the end solution, or just outreach to the public about what they should have on their homes? Or like, what do you think?
Yeah.
In theory, if we had some big evidence like, this is going to destroy the ecosystems, what do you think would be the actual solution if there is one?
Yeah. Well, so now you're asking about human behavior, right?
Yeah.
So how do we change human behavior? How do we change corporate behavior?
Mm-hmm.
I think for corporate behavior, it does need to be regulation, right? And I know that for the next 4 years, it's going to be very difficult to get anything like that passed, right? Uh, at least in the United States, right? The United States administration is very anti-regulation as of 4 days ago, right?
Yeah.
So corporations, I don't know, because corporations have insane amount of money. So I mean, insane amount of money, right? Their profits are immense, and so my argument and my education for just people is a very different argument than for corporations, because with people, it is a bottom line, right? Light costs money. It costs money.
Right.
And that's money that you could be using for other stuff. Now light is cheaper than it used to be. So people aren't realizing that, like, oh, now my budget for electricity, because I'm saving so much on lights, I can use more lights. You don't need more lights. You don't, right? Just because you can now have a couple more, you could save that money, right? You can use it for other stuff, right? You can use that money for other stuff. And once people start to realize, like, oh, you're right. I want them seeing just dollar bills leaving that light bulb going up to space, right? Because that is what they're doing. And that will, you've got a family of 4, you sort of think, oh, geez, yeah, why do I have this light on all night? There's no reason, especially because we now know it doesn't increase security. In fact, sometimes it makes it more dangerous, right? You're more likely to get robbed if you have light pollution. So as more, I think for that, it's just education. And luckily, this is an easy sell because it's about money. People care about money so much. They care about the environment. They care about money more. And so that's an easy argument. Corporations, though, they don't care. OSHA is another problem, right? Because they think that it needs to be daytime all the time to be safe, which is not really true. But yes, you got 2 different problems. You got people, which I think is an easy sell through education and just having people aware and having agency in their own electricity, right?
Like,
and just knowing
hey,
what the best steps are.
Turn off your lights, you'll save money. Like,
yes,
great,
yes.
Right?
Or use this bulb instead of that bulb, and then just make sure you're shielding it down. There's so much more you can do. That's just, and also knowing the human health effects, right? We know there's a lot of issue, including likely cancer is caused by light at night. So humans are easy, but then again, and I don't mean to call out any one of your viewers, but we also know that smoking cigarettes is really bad for your health,
right?
And it costs money, and yet there's tons of people that do that, right? So it's not as easy as like, oh, look, here's these facts, and now change your behavior, right? I mean, tons of people, and they know that smoking, they took DARE or whatever, they know, and they got caught into it. Now, luckily, I would say light pollution is not addictive. I'm like, this is where the metaphor falls apart, right? Like, you're not addicted to light pollution. I don't think.
Right.
But yeah, so humans, that's one thing. Corporations are another. But there is lots of legislation, Bradon, in Europe where they have all this legislation mandating what lights can be on and everything. And I think the other thing too, I'm a college professor. I'm obviously, on the left of the spectrum politically. But I think there's a way to start getting those people who are more on the right side of the spectrum about trespass, right? About individual freedoms, in the sense that who owns the darkness at night, right? That we need for our healthy development. Who owns that? And so you should be able to have your property should be able to be controlled. That light should be able to be controlled within your property. And so now we get into this issue of trespass, right? And this is where I can stretch my hand across to the right politician, right? Or even far right, about like, but that's like yours, right? That's yours. And like, no one should be polluting that because that's your space. So that's another area where we can get together, right? But yeah, that's what I'm trying, man. And I'm going on podcasts like this, talk to people. Obviously, your people are drinking the Kool-Aid, but getting onto like Fox News and stuff. But then people get really upset because you're telling them to turn off your lights, which you're not. But it's a long process. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So when did you like really get involved in the public like conversation of this? Was that in 2020 or?
So it was. I really started getting involved in it in like 2017 because I started working with the National Park Service, right? And they're mostly focused on educating the people coming to the parks and educating the stakeholders that are nearby parks so that they can try to reduce light pollution. So when I was in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is a very progressive city, the Utilities companies were all about reducing light pollution. Just
Hmm.
wonderful, just a wonderful nurturing place to start thinking about how to fight light pollution. Right. Then I went to Missouri, and so that's a whole other world.
Yeah.
But yeah, so probably 2017 when I started thinking, okay, how do we, as a group of people, as a society, how do we reduce light pollution? Because it is really important. Yeah, and then I got fed up with it, right? Because people don't really want to change anything, and so then I'm like, well, let's just do more research.
Time
But
to
it
get
is
back to research.
still,
Yep.
yeah, it's still, it is outreach, it's still a thing. But I don't plan on changing my career anytime soon to be strictly policy or strictly social science. But I'm still very interested
Right.
in why animals, why insects are doing what they're doing and how they're getting messed up, right? But
Hmm.
obviously, it's a human problem.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the intersection of policy and science is really important and super like underlooked, I think, because scientists are painted as this like robot who just makes the data so that
That's right.
not to get any like outcome, but just to give the data, right?
Yeah,
And I think
right.
it's a lot deeper than that because scientists do care about the thing they're studying and the world that we live in. So I think that's a really um, interesting aspect. And then I think unfortunately, I think this really started. Oh, it's been happening for a long time, but I think it mostly started in 2020, where I just don't think the public, for good reason, I think science kind of left a bad taste in the public's mouth. Like nobody really trusts the science anymore. And I don't believe science should be trusted.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's for a good reason though. I'm not sure it's for a good reason. Uh, I'm not sure that it's warranted. That view, right? To distrust science, I don't think it's warranted.
Right. And I don't know that trusting science is a good way to say that because,
Well, I think it is. I think a lot of people would say they don't trust science. They don't trust scientists. But I
right,
don't think it's warranted. And that's a longer conversation, right? Like, you
right.
gotta have a panel on your podcast to talk about this.
Yeah.
But you're
But I
right. I mean,
think,
especially in 2020, right, with the pandemic,
yeah,
how people's views have really changed. They don't care about data. They don't care about data anymore, right? It's their own experiences, their own
right.
perceived notions, anecdotal evidence, and that's what they're going with. And they're not looking at the numbers. And unfortunately, I think it's because we're not scientifically literate, right? And I think
Mm,
we have
mm-hmm.
failed most of our society with teaching them how to be scientifically literate in middle school and high school. And there's a whole lot more I can talk about that. But I think that's where
Yeah.
it's coming from, right? So people don't fully understand the scientific method. They don't understand
Mm-hmm.
how the data are actually accepted by a scientific community. That's not
Right.
just like some scientists making stuff up and getting out there. That it's very rigorous, right? I think a lot of people don't understand. And they also don't understand that how to actually gather new knowledge. The best way, the most objective way to do that is the scientific method. There is no better way, right? And
Yeah.
perhaps you can go to the classic Churchill statement about democracy being uh, the second worst form of government, right? With the first worst being all other forms of government. It's probably the same thing with scientific method, right? It's the second worst way of gathering information about the environment and the natural world, with the first being all other ways of gathering information, right?
Yeah.
And the scientific method is the best thing that we have.
That we
It is the
have. Yep.
most objective. And the issue is that, still scientists are humans. They still have biases. They still have their own objectives that can be an issue. But again,
Mm-hmm.
scientific method is the best thing that we have for understanding the world and coming up with the data that engineers and policy can use to solve all of our problems.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't. They're not taught that. They're not taught that,
No. No.
and so that's an
Yeah.
issue.
And yeah, I mean, it's crazy the times we're living in. And um, I think on the other end of the spectrum, um, I was talking about this in one of my we were talking about this in one of my classes that science is there can be two ends of it, right? Where people don't question the science, right? And that's the whole
Right.
point of science is to question it, right?
Yes.
That's the way you make new discoveries, right? Is if you question the status quo, right? So there's that side of it where nobody is questioning anything or thinking for themselves. And then there's the other side of it where nobody believes anything that has the word
That's
science
right.
on it.
That's right.
So
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
it's interesting, the world that we live in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's the issue. I mean, it all comes down to the assumptions, right? Because you do need to constantly question the assumptions that are underlying those hypotheses and predictions in the experiment. But you also don't want to assume that they did it right.
mm-hmm.
It's just all of the assumptions, right?
Yeah.
Which people should be learning in 7th grade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have to start somewhere. So you start with some question, and then you
Right.
test whether it's real.
Yeah,
or
that's
not,
right.
Whether it's true or not.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, let's shift focus a little bit. I'm interested. If we go like all the way back, what like originally got you into science? Like, what did you always like bugs, or did you start somewhere else, or like what was your childhood like with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't ever think I was like, I was a decent student all through elementary school and everything, but I was never like a 4 point. I was kind of a jock. I was really into sports and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I was always really also interested in being outdoors, right? I was a Boy Scout. I was camping all the time. I really liked being outdoors. Grew up on a lake. So the natural world was always around me. My mom was always complaining about light pollution from the neighbors. So that might have honestly been the start of it, right? It was her just ranting about how she couldn't see the stars as well, which is true. So that might have had an effect. But I was originally, I was from a rural town in Michigan. Didn't know that you could be a scientist, right? For me, a scientist was a physician. So I went the pre-med route, and I went to a tour to med school, thinking I was going to go be a physician, and I realized that being around sick people made me very, very, very depressed and ruined my day. So I'm very grateful that other people can go do that job, and that what was really interesting to me was just curiosity, right? Just trying to learn everything you can, and what have people done, and what do we not know, and let's come up with some answers. And so the process of science, right, which is why I'm so adamant about scientific method being so important to everyone.
Yeah.
The process of science was really, really interesting to me. And so I switched from going into med school to going into graduate school so I could pursue that career of science. But now if you go tell middle school Brett that he's going to be a professor of entomology, I don't think he'd believe you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he'd believe you at all.
Yeah.
He might be very disappointed. I don't know. Yeah, so it really wasn't until later on, I mean, older than what you are right now, Brayden, right? During my junior and senior year that I made that switch. Because you're just your first year, is that right? Or sophomore?
Good question. I'm third year, but I'm only 20.
You're not third year.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm third year because I transferred from a community college.
Okay, gotcha,
But I am new to UF.
Yeah, okay.
So,
that's what I was thinking, that you just started UF. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that was right about here, actually.
Yeah.
When I made this big change, career-wise. Yeah, but I was always interested in the natural world for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I do remember at one point, I don't know, I was probably like 7 or 8, when for like 1 week I just went nuts and like collected every insect I possibly could. And I'm still finding some of these like mason jars that I used for my mom's like canning supplies down in her basement.
Really?
Down in her basement, yeah. Where I'm like, oh yeah, here's this specid wasp or whatever. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Oh, that is funny.
Yeah, they're still there. I mean, it's amazing that they haven't been eaten by domestics or anything. I guess those mason jars seal really well.
I guess so.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And you said
like
Michigan, right?
Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, so pretty cold down there.
Yeah, so the basement is pretty cold. Yeah, pretty cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shifting focus a little bit, looking to the future. I mean, you talked about your future plans with your research, but like, is there any other things you want to try out or explore, or places you want to go, or like big plans for the future for that?
Yeah, as I mentioned, right, I'd like to start working with more people in Africa. I'd like to help them start measuring and thinking about light pollution as it grows in that continent, right? Right now, one of the darkest areas where it's still natural skies, is Africa. That's not going to be like that for long. So I'd like to tap into that. I also want to be sensitive, right? I mean, so I got to figure out how to walk that line. You got a white bald guy showing up into Africa. It's not always the
telling you what lights you should use.
Yeah, exactly. This is what you got to worry about, right? It's so I would like to get over there and have collaborators in Africa. I'm really excited about the prospects of working in Chile. I had a wonderful time down there. Met several people that are really excited about this. I'm really excited to develop that. Chile is such an amazing country. So here's a fun question for you, Bradon, right? Like I mapped it out in Google Earth to see. So if you put the northern tip, let's say you transpose Chile, put the northern tip up on the upper peninsula of Michigan, right? So right on the border of Canada, right there, Lake Superior, right? That's the northern tip of Chile now. How far down would the southern tip be? Where would it show up on a map or on a globe? Where would that southern tip be? Straight down. And remember, Chile pretty much just goes straight down. It goes a little bit,
very long.
but pretty much straight down. Where would it be? Where would it end up?
I think it would stretch all the way down the U.S. No? Yeah, I feel like it would be a little longer than the total width, height of the U.S.
Yeah, height.
Yeah.
Right. And so I asked a couple of my colleagues, they said the same thing. They're like, oh, it'd probably end up like maybe just near the Gulf, right?
Yeah.
Which is now going to be called the Gulf of America, but it's definitely the Gulf of Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Believe it or not, and I don't know your own personal experiences, but I believe it actually ends up in one of your favorite places, which is Panama. It reaches that far.
Really?
It reaches South America. So it actually
crazy.
Goes, and it would hit from the border of Canada and Michigan, right? It goes all the way down to Colombia. That's how far. So it is insanely long. And because of that, it stretches about 40 degrees in latitude. So it allows for some really awesome comparative studies. And Chile has this amazing network of research stations. They've got one like every 5 degrees. So I'm so excited for the basic research, really, and of course, we'll get applied stuff within Chile with this research, but really diving into all these hypotheses about different latitudes and photoperiod and ecological effects. And what's another amazing thing about Chile is that it's sea level all the way up to 22,000 feet, right? Wow. So you got every type of environment that you want. It is, so I'm very excited about that. I'm very, very excited. And the Chileans, I believe, were happy to have it. So that one's going to move forward. That's really, really exciting. That's what I'm most excited about.
Sweet. That's awesome. Super cool stuff you're working on. And I'm excited to see like how this field evolves, because I think this is like a whole field of research that nobody really thinks about. I mean, you've got That's right.
Entomology
in general, I think nobody really thinks about, but this aspect of light pollution and insects is so fascinating to me, because if you think about how much it affects, insects, what could it be doing to us or to our pets or, all of that?
That's
it's just crazy to think about.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I think we're about there. I think we covered just about everything. Is there anything else you wanted to like talk about or tell the people or anything like that before we
No, not
up?
This time. No, I think I soapboxed enough. I got to run to another meeting in a few minutes, so this is perfect. Yeah, thank you for bringing me onto the show. I've been looking forward to it. Maybe I can come talk to you in a couple of years when we know more.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Thanks so much for being on the show with me. Super awesome to hear about all this cool stuff you're working on and all of the exciting stuff your students are working on as well. Thanks so much for taking your time. And
of course, Ray, my pleasure. Yeah, awesome. You bet.